You're listening to the Meet the Farmers podcast with me, your host, Ben Eagle. Please remember to subscribe to the show wherever you are listening. Welcome to episode 289 of Meet the Farmers. I'm your host, Ben Eagle. Today, we're diving into one of the most critical challenges in farming today, profitability. How do you balance the demands of business, the realities of nature, and the need to manage energy and resources sustainably at a time when income sources and profitability itself is undergoing change? To help us explore this, I am joined by two returning guests who are tackling these questions head on, farm consultant Chris Clark and physicist Brian Scanlon. Together, they've written a new book, very recently published by 5M Books, entitled The Profitable Farm, Balancing Business, Nature and Energy Through MSO, which stands for Maximum Sustainable Output. And make sure you keep listening to the end of the episode because there is a discount code which will give you 25% off the book, and I'll tell you what that code is later. Long-standing listeners amongst you may have caught our bonus episode back in June 2023, which was when Brian and Chris were last on the show. And if you did, then you'll already have a taste of their thinking. If not, don't worry, we're going to unpack it all right here today, but I recommend scrolling back to that episode anyway. Today, we'll be digging into the book itself, discussing what Chris and Brian have been learning and developing since their last appearance on the show, unpicking profitability, and seeing what MSO might mean for the future of your farm if you decided to explore that. So whether you're tuning in from the tractor, the farm office, the car, wherever you are, settle in. There's lots to think about with this one. Chris and Brian, welcome back to the show.
Good afternoon, Ben. Nice to see you again.
Great to have you here. So let's go straight in with the book. I mean, a lot has happened since we last talked. The Profitable Farm, your book, it's very recently become available, which is exciting. To kick us off, I suppose, and this relates to the concepts themselves, your work more broadly with farmers. But if you could summarize the book, The Profitable Farm, the context behind it in a few lines, what would you say? How would you introduce it?
Well, before I just do that, let me just tell you that we're now up to 350 farm business reviews.
Well, that's a lot more than you were last time that you were here.
Yeah, and by the end of this year, it'll be nearer 400. So the empirical data is significant. But the book itself leads readers through the story of how we found out about MSO and the different challenges we faced to solve some of the problems. But if essentially it's a book about profitability, and it's a book about how that profitability is inextricably linked to business, farm business, the energy within a farm business, and the nature on a farm. And it is those relationships that lead us to the point of MSO, the point of maximum sustainable output. Although that MSO nomenclature has actually been sort of gradually been taken over by the farm sweet spot. So MSO or the sweet spot.
Okay. And I mean, certainly currently with all the news about SFI and various other things that are going on, and not least what is happening in the world at large with regards to markets, certainly profitability is going to be key on many farmers' minds. How are you finding it's going down with farmers in the book, but also just the ideas generally?
There is something for farmers that they'll be happy with some of the things we say. Some farmers will be less happy with the concepts that we introduce. A lot of farmers might be unhappy with the concept of reducing output. But actually, what drives us and what should drive every farm business is not the output, the productivity of a farm. It is the profitability that should drive farm businesses. And as we move into an even more uncertain period of where support, if any, it is going to come from, the need to drive farm profitability is going to be absolutely critical. And just to give you an example, Ben, we know now from the 350 farms that 80% of those farms, without support, will be decapitalizing their business.
There's a link between what we're doing and the underlying energy considerations behind it. Farming is as much about managing energy as it is about other things. And I think farmers are quite interested in the thought that they're part of the energy business in the widest sense of the word. In fact, they actually are probably the biggest users of energy in the UK, not just by a small factor, but by factors of 100 in terms of what they do in converting sunlight energy into grass, cereals, and then produce.
And that word energy itself, that's something we spent a lot of time on in the last podcast that you came on, talking about that. But if we take the idea of the sweet spot, Brian, or maximum sustainable output, can you just summarize what it is exactly that we're talking about there?
Well, it coincides with the point where the energy burden presented by the farm is actually minimized. And that's much more important than things like carbon offsets. At the end of the day, a better energy balance is the secret to a better environment. Making the most of the energy that's available and not using industrial substitutes, which not only expensive and have a detrimental effect on profitability, but they're also the source of most of the environmental concerns.
Tell us some of the backstory to how you came to this point and how you came together as well to be working on this. Again, some listeners will know, but can you tell us a bit about your background? Because you've been a practical farmer for many years.
Yep, I'm agriculturally trained at Sealhain, no longer there, unfortunately, and then went on to milk cows in Pembrokeshire and then farm manager in Buckinghamshire, and then got my own tenancy. But before any of that, at agricultural college, my wife and I said, we will own our own farm by the time I'm 50. And having a goal like that focuses the mind. I was actually 49 years and 6 months old when we bought the farm. And we set up various things. We did when I was a tenant. We set up an added value business. We ended up selling meat into 60 butcher shops in London and the southeast. We ended up selling added value products into Harrods, Fortnums, and Selfridges. But that wasn't what we wanted to do. We wanted to own our own farm, and we sold that really rather well, and set up a management consultancy advising farmers and others. And that management consultancy allowed us to buy a house in Hampshire. It allowed us to sell that house and have a revenue stream to buy a farm, 400 acres in North Yorkshire. And my management consultancy and business experience allowed me to produce a whole set of budgets for 400-acre farming, which completely failed. We were there. We knew how much fertilizer to put on. We knew how many lambs we wanted, how many cattle, what to do, how much grass, etc., but we couldn't make it work until gradually I understood that if we reduced output by reducing inputs, we began to, if I'm honest, reduce our losses on a before support basis. And Brian and I had worked together in the late 1980s, and he had used, and he will tell you about it, the mathematics of a blast furnace to help us become more profitable in cutting out carcasses.
Yeah, my background is certainly not one rooted in farming. When I left college, I went into the steel industry. So my career has been industrial. It went through a period of engineering, construction, jet engines, and eventually banking in the United States. So it's been with the big corporates and multinationals rather than with small businesses. But Chris just referred to cutting up a pig. The problem with a blast furnace is to allocate iron ore in order to get the right result. Well, allocations are the negative version of cutting up. All we did was put minuses in front of all the numbers, and we got Chris's answers.
So it's certainly Yeah, you don't hear many. We talk about collaboration a lot in agriculture. This is definitely taking collaboration to a whole new level.
This empirical data that I was talking about earlier is underpinned by proper physics, proper mathematics, and proper economics.
In fact,
Which
what
is,
we found, Ben, was that the economic model used by farming was wrong. The one that came into general use following the Second World War, based on the standard model of the firm, which has been very successful in industry, just didn't work in farming. And the reason was very simple. Uniquely, farming has access to two sorts of energy: free issue sunlight and industrial energy in the form of fertilizers, concentrates, and purchased inputs. The fact that that is significant in farming is the reason why the standard model of the firm had to be modified, because it didn't work. And that's really the basis of the MSO.
Since you were last on in June 2023, you've said you've worked with lots more farms since then. What have you learned about profitability or the system generally since then? And I'm interested whether the theory has still played out in the way that you've expected in that time.
so if we have any regrets at all, it is we're only just now beginning to find out that the farms we worked with in maybe 3, 4, 5 years ago, some of them, not all of them, but some of them have moved to MSO and have been incredibly pleased with the results. This concept of reducing output is a complete anathema to most farmers. And yet, the concept of increasing profits is where every farmer, every businessman wants to be. And so this reduction of industrial inputs to create more profits is critical. But we've learned some other things too. When we look at a farm as in a business way, we don't just look at the MSO. We've learned that we have to look at other things as well. We have to look at a hierarchy of profitability, and we can talk about that if you'd like to. And what has come about, particularly since the beginning of 2025 and the reduction and removal of SFI, is the concept of cover ratios. How a bank thinks when lending money to a farm business. And we've looked at, as Brian was saying earlier, that there's solar energy and there's industrial energy. The unit cost calculation on a farm doesn't work because variable costs are non-linear instead of being linear. So you have to use an evolution of unit costs. So, and just very recently, we're working on a farm resilience number for retailers.
Take us back to, I suppose, this bigger idea, or because I think this will be the key thing that listeners will be, I'm guessing, trying to get their heads around in the first place. The whole idea of cutting output. Let's focus on that, because generally the driver, most thinking is more output equals more cash. Clearly, we're talking about profitability here as opposed to cash flow. But talk us behind that idea of cutting output and how this relates to farm profitability.
You don't cut output per se, you cut the industrial inputs. And as a result of that, your output goes down. Now, as you cut those industrial inputs, fertilizer, feed, non-essential better med, etc., then your ability to have the same level of output goes down. But we can calculate, one of the calculations we do on a farm is look at the leverage. And by leverage, we want to work out how much more the CVCs are costing over and above the point at MSO. So for every £1 of additional output beyond the MSO point, our average cost for every farm is £2.65. So for every £1 of additional revenue, it is costing £2.65 on average. Arable farms are between £4.50 and £7.50. Dairy farms can be between £6 and £11 or £12. And we have one farm at £22. So for every £1 of profit, it was costing that farm £22. So by reducing their inputs and moving towards MSO, as they take £1 of revenue off, they save £2.65, or in dairy terms, £4.50 or £6 or £7. For every £1 of reduction in revenue, they save £7 or £8.
Was that dairy farmer aware quite to the extent that that figure would be?
That's such a good question, because dairy farms are some of the most profitable enterprises that we have worked with,
Yeah.
and so they don't see this the difference between using solar energy only and using the industrial energy. So they are driving output and are still profitable in a way that most other farm enterprises are not. They can be even more profitable by going to MSO. And this is now there's a correlation right now in lamb and beef prices, which, beef can be up at, what are they, £6.70, £6.80, £6.90 a kilo. And so farmers can say to us, we don't need to be at MSO because the profitability of our enterprise has gone up hugely because of the price. Absolutely true. However, they could be even more profitable with that price at MSO.
We had one dairy farmer 18 months, 2 years ago, who was encouraged by the milk buyer to increase output because milk prices had increased by 10p a litre. And he increased output as requested and lost more money, even with a 10p a litre increase in milk price. That's how sharp it can be.
What are the main barriers you've seen to farmers adopting this when you approach them, when you have discussions? I know that you've had lots of in the room discussions with farmers, and I imagine there's quite a lot of quite active debate a lot of the time.
I don't think we have left a single farm business after a business review where we haven't had everybody on board. The problem then becomes the peer pressure that farmers are put under by their neighbours, by people down the pub, by the auction mart, or whatever. So there's a huge issue with peer pressure, and all you need to do is talk to some of the regenerative farmers and listen to some of the difficulties that they face with farming in their neighbourhood. So you have this peer pressure. There's the inculcation of driving output through the education. Agricultural colleges are driving this need for output. And then there's two more, really. I think there's this lack of leadership within the agricultural industry, where the aim has been to lobby government for support rather than to help farmers become more profitable. And finally, what we do on farms, when we go on to farm, we don't tell them how to farm. We can't tell a farmer how to farm, but we can tell them where their business is. And we use business KPIs over and above the farming KPIs. So there are these three things: peer pressure, education, leadership, lack of, and using the right KPIs to drive a business. Those are the barriers.
And does the approach work across? Because I guess I'm getting to scale here. So if you were to approach 5 different farms, 5 different business models, would you be able to, using your model, you would see output reducing, you would also see input or artificial inputs reducing. But if that farmer was fairly consistent, would they have, I guess what I'm saying is, would they have to undertake a wholesale scale change in the way they farmed in order to reach the end results that your model proposes?
The model is generally applicable to pretty well every type of farm. There is one notable exception to, or not exception, but special case. When it comes to cereal farming and arable, the problem of the nitrogen deficit is central to how they move forward. You can't avoid it. And the thing is about livestock farming, grass is a wonder crop. it doesn't have this problem. So you can drive down your, we call them corrective variable costs, the industrial energy component costs. So you can drive those down much more easily in a livestock situation than you can on an arable farming situation, where I guess the options are things like rotation and the reintroduction of livestock. The biggest barrier there is proving to be a physical one, in that many arable farms have got rid of their fencing, and without fencing, livestock is a bit of a problem for them.
Another way to answer that would be to say that when we produce an analysis of a farm business, and of the 350, whether it's arable or dairy or livestock, upland or lowland, the characteristics of the break-even charts are exactly the same. They may have different gradients, different inclinations, different angles, but the main characteristics are exactly the same. And because of these 350 farms, and we can now look at a chart and we can make some pretty robust assumptions about that farm business very quickly.
What about the rate of change? How quickly would a farmer sort of expect to see a shift in the direction of their figures if they follow the model?
That leads us on to something which we haven't really mentioned, but we would recommend that things are nudged along, that there is no radical change. You try things out and move things in a reduced output, a reduced input scenario. And gradually, you'll find that there's an equilibrium builds up. The symbiosis between plant roots and the natural fertility of the soil begins to re-establish itself. And of the farms where we've calculated MSO, none of them have reached that point of reducing output to that level, because soil fertility rebuilds. And in most cases, output recovers to somewhere near their previous output using fertilizer. And so a 3 or 4 year period, maybe 5, is what we would recommend. Some have gone cold turkey, but that takes either the farm is in trouble and you need to do it very quickly anyway, or you have a reasonable cash flow generated from elsewhere to allow you to take the risk.
Yeah, I was going to say that was definitely going to be one of my questions as well, in terms of if you're making any change, especially at the moment, Sarah said, would it be good practice, I suppose, to have that buffer of cash in order to weather any sort of change?
Yes, but sometimes you don't have it. I mean, we were talking to a farm business 2 days ago, where they had a significant SFI application about to go in, and it hadn't gone in.
Yeah, which is the case for hundreds of farmers now.
Hundreds of farmers. So the business management decisions have been brought forward very, very quickly, and the choice of which business model you follow is now so important for this farm and for others that we are working with, that they won't go cold turkey, but they're going to have to really cut their cloth accordingly.
Of course, I mean, we're talking at the moment in a UK context. We're talking in a UK policy context as well. But I'm conscious that we have listeners from other parts of the world as well. I'm interested in, have you had interest from overseas in this? And is there applicability to other farmers in other parts of the world?
It is, absolutely. This concept of 2 different sources of energy, doesn't matter which country you are in. We've done some work 2 or 3 years ago in Latvia with 3 or 4 farms. They've now come back and we're doing a much bigger project. There are other inquiries just nudging into our email boxes from other European countries looking at what we're doing. I mean, this may sound a bit arrogant, but this is a significant concept, a significant thesis, which is backed up by the empirical evidence and by proper science and mathematics.
One thing that comes across, and certainly the earlier parts of the book, which is why I think it's good reading as well for farmers, no matter what you're sort of thinking along these lines. But in terms of basic financial language as well, and concepts and financial planning. You dig into quite a bit of that as well.
Again, earlier this week, we were going through a set of statutory accounts with a farmer, and he said, I've learned more about my business in the hour I've been talking to you about my statutory accounts than I knew ever before. Okay. And yet, statutory accounts don't provide enough financial information to make proper, resilient business decisions, because the statutory accounts are only there to mitigate tax liability. To really understand your farm business, you need, as a minimum, a cash flow, a current cash flow, and really you need a set of management accounts, which is what Brian was talking about earlier, this hierarchy of profitability. Quite often, and even more so now, more recently, farmers are so thankful that they can understand their business, which in the past has been totally reliant on a foundation of support, and got them out of many a business hole.
I think that there's two things here, aren't there? The first is, and we're recording this very soon after what will be year end for many people, and for a lot of people, you will send your books off to the accountant. They'll send a set of accounts back. It will sit on the office table. You might glance at it. You might look at the P&L, but also the second thing there, the way that people are planning their businesses, whether you have diversification or not, is completely shifting. So as people navigate that shift into this new business planning landscape, would you say that, I mean, I'm sure that you say that having a set of management accounts anyway, and an active basis is a good thing to be doing anyway. But do you feel an appetite that then we will be seeing more of this in future?
Almost certainly. And looking at that policy shift, I think as an industry, we should be saying the problem isn't with farmers. The problem is with the government. The government is the problem. And we're not going to solve the farming problems with government trying to create policy for us. If there is support, we should take as much of it as we possibly can. But let's take, as a farming industry, let's take control of our own businesses, take it away from the control of the state and big multinationals, and control it ourselves. We have the best farmers in the world, and yet the profitability of 80% of them is non-existent without support.
Just focusing on that 80%. And if people don't change the way that they shift their management, I suppose, shift the way they're looking at profitability, what do you project happen to those 80% of farmers?
We're seeing it beginning to happen already. And Brian has noticed this a long time ago, which was about the aggregation of farms. Farms are going to either have to get bigger, or the farmers are going to have to accept that there will be not enough second contribution, enough drawings, the availability of drawings to live off the farm full time. There'll have to be income coming from off the farm. 18% of farms that we work with do not cover their variable costs. The reason that they are still in farming, is that there is an outside income coming not necessarily from self-catering or bed and breakfast, but from someone being a salary earner as a doctor or as a dentist or as a library worker or working in the local surgery or whatever it is. 18% of farmers are relying on that. Can't carry on. So farmers are going to have to accept that either you get bigger or you farm part-time, and there's nothing wrong with that, but you have to earn enough money from elsewhere to stay on that holding.
The farming contribution to what ends up on a supermarket shelf in financial terms is very small. We looked at a farm property with something like 300 beef animals, and we also, at the same time, were looking at a South London butcher shop, quite a modest butcher shop with just 2 or 3 staff. That one farm could not have supplied that butcher shop with the meat that it required. And that's surprising.
What about advisors and policymakers? What would you like them to take from reading your book? Or I suppose reframing that, if they pick up your book, how, in terms of keeping an open mind, how would you like them to approach reading your book?
I think they need to move away from advising farmers what type of support they need to remain in business. They need to move their focus onto the core farming business and making that profitable. We have been really lucky and privileged to see some of the reports that have come out from other advisors. And all the reports that we've seen have focused on exactly the same thing, which is what prescriptions are required to get the SFI or the CS or what HLS or landscape recovery. But they're covering over the core problem, which is the farm business itself. And support is likely not to be there in 10, 15 years' time. But even if it is there, it's going to be there for 3 or 4 year chunks. That is not a way to run a farm business.
I think policymakers should understand that our natural landscape is a managed landscape. It's not the wilderness, it's a natural landscape. And the best thing that we can do with it is let farmers farm it responsibly and profitably. Interfering with that will cause all sorts of problems. Also, I think it's worth pointing out that there's an awful lot of people, particularly from the urban fringes, who don't understand the difference between biodiversity and bioabundancy. Biodiversity will reduce farm profitability. It's bioabundancy we want. We'll get all the biodiversity we need with climate change in the future. And I can tell you now that some of that biodiversity will result in the urban fringes calling them pests. So these two things, need to be reconciled. It's bioabundancy that we want.
So bioabundancy, I think that is a new one for the podcast, and it's definitely one that we should be using more.
More of the good things.
What about farmers? What do you hope farmers will take away after reading the book or coming across the ideas?
Well, I think if they're going to read the book, they've probably got a relatively open mind already, and they'll be looking for answers at how to run their farm businesses. If they haven't already accepted it, be prepared for change, because that's coming. Plan your businesses without support, and if it is there, take it. I suppose the most important thing for me is take control of your business. Don't let somebody else drive it for you. We did some analysis on a dairy farm where they were being required they would be penalized if they didn't produce enough milk above a certain level, because what the milk company wanted was to pick up a large amount of milk to make it more efficient for them to reduce their carbon footprint. And yet, to drive to that level of milk output was reducing the farm profit.
Well, what's next for you? I mean, you've been on this journey quite a while now. That it still feels like there's a lot still to do. I'm sensing in terms of more recent workshops, working with farms, but maybe another book as well.
Well, we're doing all those things: the workshops, working with farms. We're taking on people who are going to work with us on MSO by going out to farms. We can't cope with the inquiries. But actually, one of the most exciting things that has very recently come, and I'll let Brian talk about it, is a farm resilience factor.
Farmers need to be resilient in a business sense. And that's a shorthand way of saying that what they should do is get their break-even point in business terms as early as possible in terms of volume. Now, we think that resilience is the overlap between the farmer's interest and the interest of the supply chain and the supermarkets. Supermarkets should be interested in greater farmer resilience, because that means that the supply chain will be more stable. Farmers will have an increasingly important part to play in it. And at the end of the day, the consumer wins. I think it's the point where the supermarkets can start to help the farming community. At the moment, that's sometimes very difficult for people to to accept that it's happening. They see the thing in terms of conflict rather than cooperation.
I can't ask you onto the show without asking you the final questions that I ask everyone when on the show. The first is a message for the public, and the second is a message for farmers. I can sort of guess the lines that you'll be going on these, but Chris, do you want to do the message for the public, and then Brian, I'll ask you the message for farmers.
Well, the public should understand that the UK has the best farmers in the world, and importing products that we can grow very well in this country is wrong. So buy UK-based products. Farmers are the most important converters of energy, and that makes them some of the best farmers in the world. Farmers can convert solar energy through grass into food products, or through crops into food products, and lobby your supermarkets for UK ethical sourcing.
Brian, a message to farmers?
I would say to farmers, when I look at the farming community and make comparisons with what I've seen in industry over the years, farmers, although they present themselves as conservatives, they're actually people who embrace change much more quickly and easily than almost anybody else. The degree of change that the average farmer faces and doesn't even think about would frighten most industrialists. So I would say to the farmer, don't be afraid of change in terms of business management issues. Take control of your business.
Well, on that note, we will leave it there. But yeah, big thanks to Chris and Brian for coming on the show. Thanks for coming on.
Pleasure, Ben. Thank you very much for having us.
We'll leave it there, but a big thank you to my guests, Brian Scanlon and Chris Clark, for coming on the show. And thank you also for listening. As I said at the beginning, 5M Books, the publisher of Chris and Brian's book, have very kindly given us a discount code. If you use the link in the show notes to the 5M Books website and use the code MEAT25 at the checkout, that will give you a 25% discount. Next time, we'll be talking about the recent exhibition at Somerset House in London on soil. But for now, I'm Ben Eagle. This has been Meet the Farmers, and thank you very much for listening.